coming this evening. I'd like to introduce our individuals that are here tonight to help guide us through this process. We have Mark Wendland, of course, the consultant that assisted us in the form of government study. We have Mike Burns and Tom Moeller, two municipal administrators that are very well experienced here to help with the process. So I'm going to turn this over to Mark. Again, this is our second meeting. And again, Mark will help guide us through this. And again, we will be following up with a survey after this based on some of the questions that come up through this process. So again, your voices can be heard. So again, we'll turn this over to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to sit mainly because the microphone's right here. Otherwise, I would stand, but I appreciate it. As I think, well, I've been working with Jonathan and the city staff and the elected officials for probably about the last year, preparing and going through the village's form of government and really trying to get a bead from everyone on what they would like to see as far as if there are any changes, what would they like those to be? Are there ways that we can enhance efficiency and productivity? And really a lot of it focused on what both the strengths and the challenges are of the community. So that's what really we use to build a lot of this and really try to figure out a way that St. Bernard can be the most efficient organization. It's not on?
The button and it'll push.
Yeah, it's on. It's, the green light's on. Yeah, I don't know. You can hear me? All right, thanks. Thanks. So, a little bit about my background. I have been in local government for 30 years. I started my career with Delhi Township on the west side of Cincinnati. I was the assistant township administrator there. After that, I was in Independence, Kentucky for a little over 2 years. I was the city manager of Silverton for 7.5 years, great little community, not too far from here. And I was in Fairfield for about 9 years, and now I'm in Troy, Ohio, about an hour, a little over an hour north of here, a little north of Dayton. So I've served pretty much as the administrator in all those communities. I'm currently the assistant administrator in Troy. I'd like to turn it over to my colleagues and let them tell you a little bit about themselves. Obviously, a lot of you know them. They're born and bred here in St. Bernard, but I don't presume to know their background like they do. So, Mike?
Sure. Yes, I was born in St. Bernard. Didn't live here my whole life. We moved away and then came back when in later grade school. But nevertheless, I started my public career with the city of St. Bernard. I worked here for 7 years as the code enforcement officer and then planning director. And then I moved on as township administrator for what was then Union Township in Butler County. Now it's Westchester, and it's that big suburb to the north with all those people in it. I was there for about 4 years, and then I moved on to Indian Hill where I stayed for 23 years. So about a 35-year career in total in local government. Most all as chief executive officer, except for here.
Sure. Okay. And Mike may have to cut out a little early if he's seen up to leave. He has somewhere he has to be. So you know.
I'll do it discreetly.
Okay. Thanks. Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Tom Muller. I was born and raised in St. Bernard, lived here for the first 24 years of my life. Some of you may be aware that my dad was president of council back in the early 70s. My sister Barb was law director and on council for, I think, a couple of terms. I had a nephew, her son, who was also on city council after that. My brother Don was a firefighter and eventually became fire chief, and I have a nephew who is in the service department right now, so we've got a long line of service in the community. I started off as the assistant city manager in Mason, Ohio, when I graduated from UC. I have a master's degree in public administration. And then just less than a year later, my boss decided he didn't like the job, and city council hired me to be the city manager at the ripe old age of 24. So I was city manager there for almost 10 years, and I've been in the city of Madeira for almost 34 years now. So I've got almost 44 years of public service under my belt.
And how many more days?
And I'm retiring in 23 days. So I'm going to be out of public service here by the end of this year.
A well-earned retirement. Mike's been retired, what, about 10 years now?
Almost 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years next month.
Yeah. So both these gentlemen are extremely highly regarded within the profession. They're both guys that I've always looked up to, and I feel really privileged to have them here tonight with us. So, thank you.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Mark.
Sure. So just want to take a few minutes to go through the proposed government structure for the Village of St. Bernard. If you have questions, feel free to ask. There will be some time at the end to ask questions as well. So, get started. One of the things that when I met with staff, well, let me back up for a moment. So we started the study. I sat down with all the elected officials, Mayor Stuchel, staff, some key community members, and really wanted to focus on what they saw as the community's assets, and then, as I mentioned earlier, also the challenges. So I want to start with the assets. One of the big ones, I'm sure you know this, is the geographic location in St. Bernard. It's on, not just that it's on I-75, but it's really got 4 major corridors that serve it. You've got I-75 right here, you're close to I-71, you have the Norwood Lateral, and I-275 is not too far away. You're also located near several major hospitals and universities, which I think is huge because it really positions you well to be able to attract and business and residents who want to capitalize on those institutions. And then you're really not far at all from the airport or downtown Cincinnati. So you're extremely accessible. You know, it's really one of the village's greatest attributes. I think you also have a very strong commercial industrial base. Really, for a community this size, you kind of outperform any other community of this size in the region. There aren't many communities that have companies like Procter & Gamble, Smuckers, or the St. Bernard Soap Company. So you have a really strong tax base, and I think that is something that has really kept the community viable over the years. Your independent school system, I think that's a big part of your identity, and I think it's important to have that separate identity. And you also have a really highly regarded, respected parochial high school in Roger Bacon. And so for a lot of people, this is good and it's bad, people associate St. Bernard and Roger Bacon together. That's what they know about St. Bernard, is that that's where Roger Bacon is located. And you have a really well-defined, architecturally significant downtown. One of the other things I noticed as I drive through is you don't have a lot of boarded-up shops. Most of the storefronts are occupied, they are active, and that's really important. When you get to a point where a lot of your storefronts are vacant, it's really hard to come back from that. And then you have a very dedicated and engaged citizenry, which I think is really important. I think it keeps the community viable and keeps it an interesting place to live and work. So this is just kind of what we call a word cloud. It kind of points out what are the major things that came out of a conversation. What are the words we kept hearing over and over again as far as strengths? So one of the big one is the location, as we just discussed. Services, which I didn't have on that list, but I heard that a lot, that the village really provides outstanding services to its residents. And I think that's something everyone's really proud of. And it's also a very close-knit community. When you look through the other words, you see a lot of variations on the words that are in the boldest type. So I think St. Bernard, it has such a deep history. I mean, a lot of families go back here 100 years or more, and that's, especially in a major metropolitan area, that's just not a common thing. Challenges. One of the things that I heard over and over again was the statutory form of government. And that's what we're really looking at for the most part here tonight, is there a structure of government that could better serve the residents of St. Bernard, could be more efficient, provide more bang for the buck? And that's something we're going to really focus on. Another aspect of that is professional leadership. That doesn't mean that you don't have effective leadership now, but what it does mean is bringing in a staff that they do this every day. It's what they do for a living. Mayor Stuchel works a full-time job. It's hard for him to be here every single day and to know what's going on all the time. Having a professional administrator here who comes in with a background in local government, who has an education that's geared toward local government, and just has that deep experience, has the contacts. You know, that's a big part of it, knowing who to call when you have an issue. You know, having contacts with, I think it's Alloy now, correct, Mayor? You know.
Alloy.
Yeah, it used to be Hamilton County Development Corporation, but now it's Alloy, but they do a lot of economic development in and around Hamilton County. Knowing who the other leadership, who the other leaders are in the county, and really just be able to play off of each other. I think that's a big part of the professional leadership. Economic development, I think that's a double-edged sword for the village. Obviously, it's doing really well. It has some really major industries and businesses that keep it, you know, keep a lot of money flowing in. But I think there's a lot that can be capitalized based on its location. I think that maybe a stronger emphasis on that would be important. Then you see words like change averse. I think that comes from, you've got a lot of people who've lived here a long time, and change is hard. And that is something that was pointed out, that sometimes people are afraid of change. And then just continuity. And what that means is, one of the things I heard over and over again is, whenever there's a new mayor, there's a new safety service director. And I think there's a real desire to be able to have some continuity between administrations so that you don't have a changeover every time there's an election. So this is the current structure of the village. Excuse me. You've got the mayor here at the top, and then you've got the director of public safety and services and the village clerk, and you have all the department heads below. So basically everyone reports up through the mayor, the director of public safety and services as well, but the structure won't look wholly different, but it will be very different if the village decides to pursue a change in the form. So there are several potential forms of government. Right now, your statutory form, even though you have a charter, when you adopted the charter, you decided to maintain the statutory offices, that being obviously the mayor. You're going to find that in any community, but you have the president of council, which I think there's a desire to retain that position. But you have an elected auditor, you have an elected treasurer, you have an elected law director, and you have the director of public service and safety, which is appointed but is a statutory position. So a lot of things that will change once you transition from that form. There's also the mayor-council form, which is strong mayor. That is more like communities like you'll see out there. Springdale is a strong mayor form, but it does have a charter. So you can be a charter community and have a strong mayor. And then the council manager form, that would be where you have an appointed village manager who would be the CEO of the community and would basically run the day-to-day and have a hiring and firing authority. It would report directly to council. So I've talked a little bit about the statutory form already. It's a general law form of government in Ohio. Statutory form typically does not have a charter. So in that regard, St. Bernard is a little unusual and not technically a true statutory form. You have three principal elected administrators. You have the mayor, you have the auditor and the law director. You also have an elected treasurer. You will have a rec board, a park board, and one of the challenges I feel, and Troy, Ohio, where I'm currently working, is a statutory form. So I'm speaking a little bit from experience. One of the challenges is you have so many different appointment authorities, and getting all those appointment authorities to work with one another can at times be challenging. It does provide, as I said before, for a safety service director who is somewhat of an administrator within the town, but they don't have that continuity between administrations. So when there's a new mayor comes in, oftentimes the director of public safety and service goes away, and you have an entirely new staff coming in. And it causes really a lot of turmoil amongst the staff because they never know what the future is going to bring. And then, as I discussed before, the multiple appointment authorities. Under the mayor-council form, there we go. I had those backwards, sorry. Should have fixed that after the last time. The mayor is directly elected. The mayor serves as the chief executive officer and has appointment authority over all the village staff. That's both appointment and hiring, firing, and the mayor would typically be responsible for preparation of the budget and presentation of that budget to the city council. In the strong mayor form, again, oftentimes between administrations, depending on how it's set up, you can have a lot of turnover of staff. And that can really lead to just a lot of instability within the organization, within the community. The council can be elected at large or from wards, and that's something that I know that is also under consideration here. I think is a little bit of a separate issue from the form of government, but should St. Bernard maintain its ward system? Should it go to a completely at-large system, or should it maybe be a hybrid of the two? And the council is responsible for enacting law, setting policy, and it does possess the power of appropriation, or as I like to say, the power of the purse strings. So the mayor can propose the budget, but the council has the authority to say what the mayor can actually spend. And then it can provide for a municipal administrator, and that individual would serve as the chief administrative officer. That person would be here on a day-to-day basis to oversee the staff, direct the staff. And the administrator would typically assist with preparation, administration of the budget. And then the third form is the council manager form. This is the most common form of government in Ohio and in the United States at large. In that form, the village council possesses all power to set policy and has all authority to do so as well. The mayor and a council manager form can be selected from amongst council. It really depends on how it's set up. Sometimes the mayor is still directly elected. The mayor typically is ceremonial in a village manager form. So that sounds like the mayor has no power. That actually is not the case. The mayor has the bully pulpit. The mayor is oftentimes one of the most visible, influential people in the community. And so the mayor still has a lot of influence over policy in what develops, but the village manager is the person who serves on a day-to-day basis, is the CEO of the organization in this form. The mayor does function as the ceremonial head of government, as I said before, and he does have the right, or she has the right, to introduce legislation and take part in all discussions of council. And then the nonpartisan municipal manager is appointed by the council and serves, as I said before, as the chief executive officer. The nonpartisan part is really important. ICMA, International City County Management Association, is the professional organization for city managers in the United States. It does require that city managers do not participate in politics. So as a member, all three of us are members of ICMA. We cannot participate in campaigns. We can't sign petitions for election. What that does is it really keeps the manager as a neutral third party. And really, the intent is that the manager serves everyone in the community, not just a certain constituency. The manager typically is selected based upon merit and professional credentials. So, for example, I have a master's in public administration. I think Mike does, and I know you do. So that is a pretty typical degree for most city managers. And we all have pretty deep experience in local government management. And the manager has appointment authority over all village staff, prepares and presents the budget to council for approval. Are there any questions at this point from anyone before I proceed? Thank you. So there is a proposed form here, and I would tell you it is a hybrid between the mayor council and the council manager form. In talking to different people, there are different opinions on what St. Bernard should do here. There are some people who feel that the village should go all the way and go village manager right now. There are others who feel that the village needs to go through a transition to get there. So this would be a process where I think the village can really experience what is good about both forms. And if the village at a later time decides they want to transition to one form or the other, they could do that. So the mayor in the proposal would be directly elected and would retain ultimate appointment authority over staff. And that would also include if someone's disciplined or terminated, the mayor would retain ultimate appointment authority with one exception, and that would be over the municipal administrator. I'll get into that a little more detail a little bit later on here. The Safety Service Director position would transition into the Municipal Administrator position. The municipal administrator would be here on a day-to-day basis, would oversee the staff, would appoint the staff with the consent of the mayor, and that staff would include an appointed finance director and appointed law director. So the village manager would oversee that. And as we talked about before, the village administrator would be appointed based upon merit and credentials. So you would be looking for someone who has a background in local government and probably who has an educational degree in local government as well. And then one of the things that I think was a major concern was how does this new form provide continuity between administrations? So this is where that really comes in. The municipal administrator will be selected by the mayor with the approval of council. So what that means is the mayor would have an opportunity to present some candidates to council, but the council would have the approval authority. The mayor could not just hire someone. Likewise, the mayor could not just terminate the administrator. Council would have to approve a termination. This would be so that you have that continuity between administrations, so that there is stability in City Hall, that projects that have been started, there's someone there who knows the history and how to complete that project. It doesn't mean the administrator cannot be terminated. It just means that it's going to provide some mechanisms so that it's not just one person making that decision. And we just talked about this. Termination of the municipal administrator's employment can be recommended by the mayor, but must be approved by a council majority. And then, as we talked about before, the elected auditor and treasurer positions would be combined into an appointed professional finance director position. This position, you would be looking for someone who has a background in accounting or finance, someone who has hopefully some pretty deep municipal experience as well, doing municipal finance administration. It doesn't necessarily have to be a full-time position. So like the Village of Silverton has a part-time finance director. It is someone who has all those credentials, but just doesn't want to work a full-time job, and it has worked really, really well for them. So I think that's something that the village could look at is, what would be the capacity of this individual? And then the elected law director would transition to an appointed law director, and the goal would be have someone who has an expertise in municipal law. But more than that, if they came from a larger firm, you might also be able to get some really deep experience in other areas that are frequently needed, like labor law, real estate law, those sorts of areas that I know in my career there have been times when I really needed a specialist in those areas. So this is what the proposed structure would look like. You would have the mayor who would appoint the municipal administrator with excuse me, the approval of council and the law director, and then you would have all the department heads would report to the municipal administrator, but ultimately to the mayor. The transition, it would be a statutory model to a true charter model. The Director of Public Service and Safety would become the municipal administrator position, and right now, I think Tommy he's looking to retire. Is that correct? So I don't think anyone's looking that anyone should lose their position here. I think that's important to note. The auditor and treasurer would be combined into a finance director position. I know the current auditor has stated she would willingly give up her elected role, and I think that's where she still is. I don't know. And then the elected law director would transition to an appointed law director. And then the next steps, I think, are for you to, one, gather input. We've done some of this already through the public forums and meeting with people, talking about, what the structure might look like, but also through use of social media. The village website's been used pretty effectively to get the word out, and through the public forums we're here tonight. You also have the village newsletter that goes out periodically. We need to finalize the charter language. There is proposed language, but there might be some tweaks that you would want to make to it. And then place the charter amendments on the May 2023 ballot and really promote why that you think this is necessary. So I think you really have two different issues. One is the form of government, and then on the other would be the structure of council itself. Do you want to retain the at-large system you currently have? Do you want to transition to some sort of hybrid between the two, or would you want to, I'm sorry, you have the ward system now. Would you want to retain that? Would you want to transition to a hybrid between ward and at-large, or would you want to go all at-large? I know there's also been some talk about the number of council members. You currently have 7. That's a pretty typical number for communities. I wouldn't go below 5, but I don't think you need more than 7 in my opinion. So, questions?
Mark, so, and you may have had this recommendation previously, but regardless of the number of council members, wasn't there a recommendation that the terms be offset, because rather than the way we have the complete turnover?
Currently, and I want to give these gentlemen a chance to speak a little bit too. I'm sorry, I monopolized all the time here, but.
It's your gig.
Yeah.
But you're.
Yeah, but yeah, we're happy to answer questions at that point.
So yeah, one of the things that would be a recommendation would be to go to 4-year staggered terms. So what that would mean is half a council would be elected, 4 would be elected for the first 4 years, and then the way they did this in Silverton, I know they transitioned to this, it was after I left, but so basically they had an election, the top 4 were elected to a 4-year term. The bottom 3 got a 3-year term, and then they had to run again or a 2-year term. They had to run again in 2 years, at which point those individuals transitioned to a 4-year term. What that does, in my opinion, is it also brings stability to the council, that you don't have an entire council turning over at one time, so that you retain that history, that knowledge of what's happened in the past, why it has happened. I think that really does help to bring additional stability to the community.
Yeah, most council manager forms of government do have staggered terms, just for that reason, is that way you don't get a whole new council at once, and there is some continuity that takes place. I'm familiar with most of the charters around here, and I think that's very, very common.
That is correct. So, and you can have it in that hybrid I talked about. So you could have where the wards run in one cycle and the at-large run in the other. That would be how you set that up would be a little bit different. You'd have to really think about that as to how you would run people for those various offices, but that is something that I think could have some value.
Don't
Questions from
everyone
the audience?
rush to the microphone at once.
So one, excuse me, one thing the Board of Elections told us is that currently, and I'm assuming it's because we're the statutory form, that currently if somebody runs for council, they have to get 50 signatures. Most other villages and cities around only have to do 25. Is that because we are statutory?
I think that's probably what you wrote into your charter.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Board of Elections said that if we change that, we just need to let them know so that they know
Right.
when people, so just a suggestion to add that.
Okay.
along
Yeah,
with it.
that's something that could be added or not in the city charter, Steve.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I got a question. Why go through the hybrid instead of just going directly to the complete change? Because why wait a couple of years and then have to come back and change it? What is the benefit of keeping it a hybrid system?
I think the benefit of the hybrid is you do have a transition period where you can get the community comfortable to the idea of the structure. Certainly, it's a community decision, though, as to what you want to do. And I think it's really important. I think there's a lot of momentum right now. I think that it's time for St. Bernard to make some sort of a transition, but the village has to decide what they want that to be. So you could also do something, you could say, okay, right now, we're going to transition to this form, But you could write it into your charter amendment that in 5 years, 7 years, at this date, you will transition to the full village manager form of government. That's something you could do. But again, to your point, it would not be happening immediately.
Yeah, I just don't see the benefit of delaying it. And who are you saying has to get comfortable with it? The citizens or the people?
Everyone. Yeah, everyone. I mean, it's not just the
The
elected
leadership has
officials.
to be
but-
comfortable with it. I think the citizens have to be comfortable with it as well.
So have you talked to citizens about it? I mean, is that just what you think it is? Or did you get input from normal citizens that don't work for the city or?
I did interview some citizens, but the bulk of the people that I interviewed were city staff and city elected officials.
Okay, because I see in council meetings, nobody hardly shows up, and so I think the majority of residents, the 4,000 people, would be happy with going straight to it and not a hybrid.
And that information may play itself out in the surveys and, and any other public input that comes about.
Yeah, if you get enough of it that represents the whole
Sure.
village. All
Yeah,
right,
I mean,
thank
it's
you.
certainly, as Mark pointed out, it's certainly possible to transition right to the council manager form of government. A lot of communities do it that way. That's not unusual, but it just depends upon what the community itself wants, and that the community are the people.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
And the two things, I guess. First one is, if we want to stay with what we have, we can do that, right? I mean,
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I said the first point I want to make is, we don't have to change the government if we don't want to.
You don't have to,
I mean,
no.
that's been working fine all these years, and I understand.
I guess based on my interviews, some people don't think it's working fine, but.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Right? But the presentation is change, and I just wanted to make sure people understand we don't have to.
You don't have to change, that is correct.
And then the other point, you were talking about maybe the finance director dropping them down to part-time. So you currently have 2 full-time positions, and I know the auditor and I know the service director, and I know they work their butts off. So I don't know how we can think that we're going to cut down to one part-time person. And where do we see the HR area moving to? Because right now the auditor's taking care of that, and, she says that's the bulk of her job.
I would see the village administrator probably handling most of the HR issues.
Is that how you do it at your current employment?
Well, in my current situation, yes, I am the HR person at Troy. I'm the assistant administrator, but it's a city of 26,000 people.
Right.
But when I was the city manager of Silverton, yes, I did all of the HR for the village. That was my role. I also did all the economic development and development administration as well. So, yeah. I'm not saying you have to go to a part-time finance director. I'm just saying that depending on how you decided to structure the staff, that might be an option. But you could certainly keep a full-time finance director.
I'm just trying to figure out where the work's going, right?
Sure.
Because you
Yeah.
got 2 full-time people, and I know they work the butts off for the city, and now you're gonna bring in one person, and you're saying they're gonna take over basically both jobs, or the bulk of both jobs, and then just have the finance, maybe go part-time. But, just looking at how the city's been working over the years, it seems like that's an awful lot of a big ask for someone to take over.
Hiring a finance director doesn't mean that that person won't have staff that will be working full-time.
Right, and I can give you the example in Madeira is that we do have a part-time chief financial officer. We do entitle it the treasurer, but it's basically the finance director. But it's a part-time position. But underneath that position, we have 2 full-time and 1 part-time individual that are responsible for bookkeeping, all of our accounts payable, all of our accounts receivable, all of our tax collections, and Madeira is twice the size of St. Bernard. So, I mean, so I said, it all depends on the workload, it all depends on, the distribution of responsibilities, but we've determined, even in a city of our size, we don't need a full-time finance director. We need somebody to oversee it, but this gentleman is a CPA, he has his own company, so he works part-time, and then he has full-time staff under him.
Okay. Okay, so we're looking at maybe putting in more people into city government instead of taking out people. So,
Not necessarily,
well,
not necessarily.
I think you would be redistributing the staff, is what where those duties go, they would be redistributed. I'm not going to sit here and tell you today you're going to have less people, but I think you're going to streamline a lot of things and how they operate. I think by bringing in a professional, I mean, right now, you can get a treasurer, as I know you are, or you can get an auditor who have a strong background in finance, but that is not required under state law. Anyone can run for those positions. All they have to be is an elector of the city. So I think that one of the advantages of it is it really does guarantee that you're going to have someone who has a background in finance.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Hello. First of all, thank you for being here and answering all of our questions.
Sure.
I have a question that kind of spurs off of what you just talked about. So, first of all, I was kind of surveying Facebook a little bit for folks who couldn't be here today to see what they were wondering. And one of the questions that popped up was the rationale or benefit of having a law director or some of these other positions go from elected to appointed, the rationale behind that, and then,
Sure.
sorry for a double barrel question, but then additionally from that, would it still be a requirement that these appointed positions like municipal manager, law director, would they still need to be residents of St. Bernard,
Okay.
ideally?
Sure. We'll start with your first one, and I don't know, one of you guys want to take it, or?
No, go ahead and start.
All right.
I'll fill in any. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. So the rationale behind having appointed rather than elected, I mean, especially, in any community, I think you really want the people who are in those roles to have a strong background in municipal law or local government finance. So like, for example, local government finance is different than corporate. It's fund balance, and that's not what corporate America uses. It's very different. And so I think it's important that someone who has that background and is the one who is administering the finances for a city or a village. Further, and this will kind of get into your second question a little bit, especially when you have a small village, it can be very difficult to find people who have all of that experience that you're really looking for. And I know there's a real desire oftentimes to have people live within the village that they're serving, and that's a good thing. But I also think sometimes you are not going to be able to get the people who have the best and the deepest experience that way. So by allowing it to be someone who is, maybe lives in another community, they are able to provide you expertise that you maybe cannot find at home.
Got it, that makes sense. I was wondering, just with that transition, would you have to prioritize whether they live in St. Bernard or if they're the most qualified candidate? Because ideally we would have
Sure.
both, but.
The
yeah,
recommendation is not that you would not require residency. And in fact, under Ohio law now, residency cannot be required.
Okay.
That was, how many years ago?
About 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe more than that.
No, more than that, yeah. It used to be the communities through their charter or through some legislative action could require residency, and the state of Ohio declared that requirement is unconstitutional. So even if it's in a city charter any longer, it can't be enforced.
Got it, okay. Thank you so much.
So the one way is with your municipal administrator, just throw this out there, I'm not recommending this. You can get around it through an employment contract that requires them to live in town.
Oh, okay.
That is one way around it, but you really can't get around it with any other employee at this point.
Okay, got it, that makes sense. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks again, guys, for taking the time to come out here and present this to us. The question I have is, I'm still hearing appointed positions, and I thought we wanted to get away from that and have more consistency with every election. Is there a way then to go to contracts for these individuals instead of appointments?
Okay.
That could take place every 4 years, or are you using the word appointment as hire?
I'm using the word appointment as hire right now.
Yeah, Ray, that's That's what we would mean in that
Because
context.
around here, appointments meant a much different thing
Sure.
with each.
Political appointment is what people are used to, yes.
Right.
Okay.
And we use the word appointment, I think, very differently
Yeah.
in our role. It's, as, you know, the administrator, the manager is appointing the staff that are going to work for the administrator or manager. So it does mean hire.
Yeah, we use that synonymously with employ, right?
But it means something, to your point, yeah, but it means something very different to us than.
All right, thanks.
Sure.
One more thing I thought of while John was up here, excuse me, he's not going to answer himself, but his term is a 4-year term currently as treasurer, so he's got 2 more years after next year. How do you handle something like that if you're going with a financial person? I mean, he was elected for a 4-year term, you can't just
Sure.
kick him out. I know he doesn't want to ask that, so I thought of it while he was up here, so just food for thought, I guess, for your thoughts.
A charter change changes his life. That 4-year term goes away.
It would, unless you decide you wanted to basically make it effective at the end of his term. But it's cleaner to do all this at one time. It's just a lot cleaner.
Are we going to be able to make the choice whether we want all-at-large council people or ward? Is that going to be something that we're going to be in a survey, or?
That's one thing that Jonathan and I were talking about. I think there is going to be a survey that's
Okay.
going to be completed or sent out probably early in the new year. But that's a question that really will have to be placed on the ballot. If you want to do it, that question in the spring, it'll have to be placed on the ballot very, very soon. But it's not something you don't have to do both the form structure of government and the structure of council at the same time. Those could be 2 different ballot initiatives. You could do the second one in November if you wanted to. But I think you're going to have your ballots initiative submitted to the Board of Elections by maybe very early February, maybe even February 1st.
It's 75, usually 75 days.
Right.
So.
Okay, so we'd have to vote on that, we'd have to actually physically vote on that
You would have to
particular
vote on that,
section.
correct. That is not,
All right.
yeah, that's part of your charter, so you would have to amend the charter if you were going to change from that.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Hello. So I got it straight. So the administrative assistant will be, in order to, if we decided we want to get rid of them, it would be a vote of council?
Yeah, the municipal administrator, it would require a vote of council in order to terminate the administrator. That is correct.
Okay, but to get the job, it's as simple as the mayor appoints them?
No.
It's okay.
It also would require a majority of council to appoint the municipal administrator.
Okay, sounds good. And then, I mean, I don't really see much difference between what you're saying and what you want, what we got and what we want to do, other than the financial, the treasurer and the auditor's position. I mean, the administrative assistant, as far as I'm concerned, Tommy Paul should be that person now, the day-to-day operations. I got a different view of what John thinks, but I don't see much difference. One other question, the auditor, if that became part of the financial director, would we get an auditor like, I think 99% of the other communities in the state of Ohio, where it's an elected official that's just part-time? Or are you saying do away with auditor altogether?
The recommendation would be to eliminate the elected auditor position and transition both the treasurer and the auditor position into a hired a hired finance director position who would have a background in municipal finance, fund accounting, and that would be the recommendation.
And that person, again, would be through council would have the final say, so, okay.
No,
No. Go ahead, Mike.
no. That person would be hired by the administrator and the mayor. Council only has a vote on the municipal administrator,
Okay,
Correct.
both the hire and fire.
okay.
And in the context of the city having an auditor, I'm assuming St. Bernard still is audited by the state of Ohio. So you still have that as an audit function, either through the state auditor's office or through the city being able to hire a private auditor and do the annual financial audit that then would be submitted to the state of Ohio. So.
Correct.
And Bob, if I could, just to clarify a couple things. So in your reference to, it doesn't appear as though it changes much. What we are looking to do basically the village administrator would be hiring an individual that would serve in the same capacity as, a village manager. The individual has the economic development experience, the training in HR. So basically, we're hiring an individual that has the professional ability to run the day-to-day operations of the village. We're looking outside of our own small bubble for that. So it wouldn't be a political appointment any longer. It would be an actual professional hire, and that individual would stay in that position unless they chose to quit or were terminated, but it wouldn't change with an election. So there would be continuity and consistency in City Hall, so there wouldn't be a disruption to service to the citizens or the employees. It would be the goal to have that stability.
Right, and I understand that, and I totally agree with that. Would there be criteria set in stone for hiring them, or, because if not, then you're back to, it could be a political.
So basically, what we would be doing, we would be looking to professionals like you see right here. Mr. Mueller and Mr. Burns are individuals that also have dealt with municipalities that are seeking potential candidates. They also would assist in trying to help find those individuals, the talent base, whether it be somebody that's, new right out of college, or whether or not we would be looking for a seasoned individual. My goal and what I would be hoping to do would be is that we would be hiring somebody that would be experienced, that maybe this would be their last, appointment or hire. Maybe they're looking for 5-6 years worth of employment, to be able to bring that experience to the village, to be able to set up, the operation within City Hall, and then after their retirement, looking to transition to someone else. But our goal is to look outside of St. Bernard to bring the experience in that's necessary to maybe what we're missing. I mean, things are functioning here. However, we do need to look outside for a greater opportunity, because there are things that we are missing out on. And this is a great opportunity for us at this point to look for that and, again, provide the necessary continuity that we need and professional experience.
Okay, I agree with you. Did we look at salaries, like, I guess what I'm saying is, if we're gonna bring in a financial director and an administrative assistant that's professional, how much is that gonna up our yearly budget? Do we have any idea what salaries would run?
There's some idea. I mean, I will tell you, St. Bernard is extremely lucky in that it has the tax base that it has. It's much stronger tax base than most, I would say 90% of the communities of its size out there.
99%.
Yeah, absolutely. So there has been some consideration of that. I can't say that there's anything set in stone in that regard at this point. But Jonathan and I have spoken, and I think as a general idea, I don't want to put you on the spot, Jonathan.
No, that's okay. So as far as, we would be looking within, industry standard. So obviously, we're probably looking with a six-figure salary, but we're also paying for, that experience, which is something that we have not been able to draw internally. Yes, there would be a restructure in City Hall. We've already had a reduction in force. I mean, I've done as much as I can without opening the charter to eliminate, potential unnecessary positions or what might not be needed. We also aren't looking to change the level of service that our citizens or, our local businesses or industrial partners have become accustomed to. I think as far as how, our tax office runs, our auditor's office, the idea of the blending and merger of financial responsibilities under the direction, of a CFO, and then overseeing, the operation of the departments itself, but by also eliminating the elected side, say for auditor, you also have the opportunity to have an individual that is hired to perform those duties that, again, is not going to disrupt a level of service, again, to the citizens or the employees. So once the village administrator comes in and under their direction and recommendation would assist in all of those specific transitions. But yes, it is going to cost us for that talent and that professional experience. And I don't know of any other way to avoid it, but again, I think it's something that's necessary for the village of St. Bernard to maintain and continue to move forward.
If I could build on that a little bit, Jonathan. So you've heard me reference the village of Silverton, just a few miles from here. They transitioned to a professional form of government in the late 90s. The goal is always that the administrator more than pays for themselves. You're getting a bang for the buck out of that position. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the AG 47 project in Silverton. That is a $40 million project on the site of the old Silverton School. There was a land swap effectuated between the school district and the city. The school was built, the new school was built in the park, which frankly at the time the city could not afford to maintain. Out of that, the city got a much more active park, but it also got a brand new park on the remaining acreage. But what's the most important part of that deal is the village, the city got the old site to build that $40 million development. That site is about 2% of the total land mass of the city. It increased the city's revenues by 13%. So that oftentimes is what a professional administrator can do for a community. And it's not as simple as just they have the education. They have the contacts. They know who to reach out to. They bring a lot of that with them as far as what they can achieve and being there on a day-to-day basis to keep the momentum going.
Okay.
Other questions? Well, if there are no other questions, I really want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. It has been a real pleasure and privilege to be able to work on this study with the village, to really get to know a lot about the village of St. Bernard and its staff, its people, its elected officials. So I really appreciate that, and thank you again for coming. I want to thank my colleagues, Mike Burns and Tom Muller, for being here tonight and coming out on their personal time. And if you have questions, you can always let Jonathan know, and he will get in touch with one of us. Thank you.
So again, I'd just like to thank these gentlemen. Working with Mark's been a real pleasure. And again, I thank Tom Muller and Mike Burns for being here and bringing their experience. We also had Mike Camp here previously at the last meeting. Again, another great resource. So, I mean, St. Bernard's very fortunate to have individuals that are willing to continue to help. And as we transition through this process, I know that they'll still be there for us. But again, I want to thank them for being here, and you can look forward to a survey that will be forthcoming as we try to work through this process. But please feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions or concerns as this process progresses. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you, everyone.